Welcome back to On Texas Football. I'm Jeff Howe, joined by CJ Vogel. It's time for another edition of Longhorn Weekly, in this edition brought to you by Bluebird Organizing. We'll tell you a little bit about Bluebird here later in the show. CJ, we're starting spring football. That's where we'll start this week's edition of Longhorn Weekly. Go back to some of your team notes you posted late in the week. Now, the Longhorns won't be back on the practice field until Tuesday. Let's start with the injury, CJ, just to kind of recap where we are. We've got Jordan Washington, Colton Vasek, Justice Terry, and CJ Baxter all dealing with or having dealt with something. The good news is that Justice Terry seems to have been good to go after that hamstring issue, I guess we'll call it, on the first day of practice. But other than that, you've got CJ Baxter on the mend from the knee injury, Colton Vasek and Jordan Washington. Vasek obviously dealing with an injury that he had cleaned up in the offseason, and then Jordan Washington's dealing with an injury he suffered early spring practice. What's it look like for those other three guys outside? And if you want to reinforce, CJ, again, Justice Terry does seem good to go after that hamstring issue.
Yeah, he's back on the field. Again, it was a bit of a strain early in practice, early in spring ball. He's been back on the field. I actually heard he's looking really good, Jeff. And for folks if you've seen him in person, that's no surprise, right? But also on the offense side of the ball, you're still dealing with no DeAndre Moore. You're still dealing with no Ryan Wingo. So getting these young cats some looks in that first team offense, that's imperative right now, right? We've talked about the jump that they need to make, right? The 4 wide receivers in this freshman class. How quickly can they acclimate? Well, look, I'm told Dalen McCutcheon had himself a nice little scrimmage or live team setting situation on Thursday night. So that's one of those guys that's making some noise with the extra reps going his direction. Going back to some of those guys that you mentioned, look, hey, Colton Vasek out of the sling, working back to get on the field. I don't believe he will get on this field for the spring session, Jeff, but I do think he'll be one of those guys that's ready to go for the summer as well. And then CJ Baxter, very much in that same mold, not yet ready to get back on the field. But hey, come summer, that'll be around that time for 9 months, 10 months after the ACL injury. And again, there was more to the ACL than just that ligament in his knee that was injured last August. So that's about the timeline that you hope to see him back. 9-10 months. We'll see. Again, making sure that there are no setbacks and he's able to see the field for the fall. One other guy I wanted to mention is Christian Clark, and we've continued to hear that name maybe more as a surprise more than anything, saying, hey, 7 months after that Achilles tear, he's back doing what he's doing on the field right now and looking pretty darn good. Texas still keeping him a bit limited in these live situations, of course, for good reason. But he does and has been looking very good, I've been told, in the drill settings with the running backs for Chad Scott in his room.
Yeah, and then you've got Jordan Washington obviously dealing with the shoulder that at On Texas Football, we've reported that he's expected to miss the rest of the spring. It's more reps for Spencer Shannon. CJ, I think you laid out something that I wanted to mention, with the wide receiver situation being what it is. It's a great opportunity for the young guys to get a chance. And, having been down this road before with young wide receivers, those guys are going to be up and down. You'll hear maybe one practice, somebody else stands out. Like you said, early on it was Parker Livingstone. Most recently, it was Dalen McCutcheon. I'm sure before too long, you'll hear something about Jamie French and then maybe something about Khalil Lockett. So that's typically when you're talking about young receivers, that's the consistency. And that's why Sark always talks about consistency. I was going to say the consistency he harps on, but it's true. Those guys are going to be up and down. They haven't established a practice baseline yet. So I wouldn't get too spooked, CJ, in other words, if you're hearing, hey, Dalen McCutcheon's doing really well. That doesn't mean that Jamie French or Khalil Lockett or Aaron Butler are having bad practices. It's just that, hey, on this day, this young, inconsistent guy was the most consistent or showed out the best.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. And look, to your point, it started off as Jamie French. Now it's been Dalen McCutcheon. We've heard great positives about Khalil Lockett. Again, it's just finding that consistency. For Michael Terry, that first practice that we were at, Jeff, I think one of the more physically impressive kids that we saw running the routes was Michael Terry, right? So, and of course, he's been on campus longer than all of them. He got here in the middle of December for the playoff run for the Longhorns. So he's a bit further ahead. Again, not by much, but he was able to see what these practices were like, how it's like to sit there in the locker room, to put your cleats on, to board the bus and get out to go to Denny's and stuff like that, right? So that matters. And to your point, it's basically, a roll of the dice. Is it going to land on your number that day? for you to go out and have a great day. And that's where the staff is right now.
Yeah.
They want to find that consistency amongst the quad, the group of 4 right there. So as spring goes into week 3, that's going to be the big adjustment. No longer are you a fresh face. This is now the expectation.
I'm glad you mentioned Michael Terry because he's been at wide receiver. He hasn't worked at tight end, which I think maybe some people were expecting him to maybe get some run there, especially with the numbers being what they are. But Spencer Shannon's been getting the work with the ones. Ridge Barker, walk on. That's a name you'll probably need to get to know, at least until Texas figures out what they're going to do in the spring portal window with tight end. And then Amari Winston, the young freshman. We talk about Nick Townsend not being here yet, but Winston's on campus already going through spring ball. Again, it's a really good opportunity for those younger guys, those inexperienced guys, even Spencer Shannon, who hasn't played a ton, to get some quality reps in spring ball. But CJ, I think just from if nothing else, from a number standpoint, I think just really drives home that this staff needs to go out and get a tight end in the portal in the spring window.
Yeah, and again, you came into the spring without a reception in that room for any of their careers. Now, that's a tough hill to overcome regardless, but now that you're seeing the guy that was expected to lead the charge sideline, you're sitting there saying, okay, it's razor thin right now. Like, you have no margin for error. If Spencer Shannon were to sprain an ankle or something, you'd be in big trouble, right? It'd be between 2 early enrollee freshmen and a walk-on from Lovejoy. Shout out my boy Ridge Barker. But point being, there's no production, there's no experience, there's no really availability for the staff to go 2 tight ends or 3 tight end look if they needed to at the moment. So that's the concern. And again, I do think a portal tight end is on the way. We'll see where Texas goes. Of course, Jeff, whenever it feels like a guy enters the portal that they're on, they get him to campus immediately. So about a week away from that portal window opening up, we'll see how quickly and where they go at the tight end position.
You brought it up, and I think it's worth repeating. Of the tight ends on the Texas roster, Malik Ogbo is your leading receiver among tight ends, jumbo or otherwise. So I think that just shows you, yes, it would be nice to add some experience into that room. We've talked about the right tackle battle between Brandon Baker and Andre Kojo, CJ. So I don't know that we need to get into it that much more. Again, I've called it a sneaky good battle. I think it's beyond that now. I think this is really good competition between Baker and Kojo. Brandon Baker, talented kid, was a really highly recruited prospect, coveted blue chip prospect out of Mater Dei out in California. But Andre Kojo is a guy that, came to campus young. They let him marinate for a little bit. And now a couple years into the program, it seems like he's ready to at least start making a serious push to get himself on the 2 deep. And not just that, CJ, but some of the younger guys. I know we talk about Brandon Baker and Trevor Gooseby when we talk about young guys, but we keep hearing a lot of really good things about Nick Brooks in his first spring as an early enrollee. And then Nate Kibble may be next man up on the interior if Texas had to go play a game right now. So I know I keep talking about it, and maybe folks are tired of hearing me talk about it, but I'm not tired of talking about it. Anytime you've got several young offensive linemen who look like promising prospects, that's a really good problem to have when you're trying to figure out how to get these guys enough work in spring.
Yeah, one more name I'll throw to that, Jeff, is Daniel Cruz on the interior. I mean, again, another intriguing young prospect that's turned heads. And look, this is where I'm at. And we talked about this earlier in the offseason, Jeff. Texas has to replace a lot on the offensive line. And we've talked about that's not an easy thing to do. But when you're replacing guys who have been in the program and been in the same system for 3-4 years, it makes that transition so much easier, right? You no longer have what you would expect to be those communication gaps and stuff along the lines of just not knowing protections or slides or whatnot. Texas is there. Now it's about making sure that the consistency on the field and finding the right 5 is there. But you look across the board, aside from a Brandon Baker, you're looking at year 3 or year 4 guys at every single position. And that's really important in my eyes. And on the Kojo Brandon Baker conversation, I spoke with 2 guys over this past weekend. Both of them kind of shining some light towards Andre Kojo in this one. Not to say that he's going to be the new poll leader here, but I will say one of the basic conversations I had with one of my sources was, I didn't expect him to be at this point in his career. Now we're going on to year 3 with him. But again, to say that this is where he is pushing the 5-star modern-day prospect Brandon Baker to the limits here. It's a little tighter than I expected coming into this spring. Going into week 3, it's going to continue to be pretty tight moving forward.
Yeah, we'll get to one of the positions on defense that the guys cover. We talked about wide receivers a minute ago. The guys in charge of covering those wide receivers. We'll get to talking about the defensive backs here in just a minute. But before we do that, shout out to our sponsor for this edition of Longhorn Weekly. It's Bluebird Organizing. Shout out to Perry Ricard and Bluebird Organizing. Is your wife feeling overwhelmed? Does she constantly mention how she wishes she could find items more easily, or how she wants to park her car in the garage, but there's no space? Or maybe she complains about tripping all over the kids' toys. Are you, as her husband, feeling at a complete loss as to how you can help? With spring cleaning well on its way and Mother's Day just around the corner, give your wife the gift of a lifetime with a customized organizing session from Bluebird Organizing. Perry, the owner of Bluebird Organizing, she'll come into your space without judgment and give your wife the organized kitchen, closet, playroom, or garage of her dreams. Plus, Perry will take all the donations for you at the end. That's going to leave you and your family ready to enjoy the new space. It's time to give your wife a gift she'll love for years to come. Call or text 737-346-7779 to book your free in-person consultation today. Again, that's 737-346-7779. And again, a shout out to Perry and Bluebird Organizing for sponsoring this edition of Longhorn Weekly. CJ, let's go ahead and talk about that secondary, and I'll take up for you. Yes, Jalen Gilbo was omitted from your report by accident, not done out of malice. But Gilbo's in that secondary. We know Manny Muhammad is. The battle for the cornerback spot opposite of Manny Muhammad and that nickel position, some interesting names popping up, and two guys I wanted to talk about specifically because I feel like we've talked a ton about Kobe Black. Jelani McDonald's been a hot topic of conversation because I'm expecting, I think we all are expecting him to make this really big jump from his sophomore year to his freshman year, just given his trajectory. But the two guys I want to talk about, Wardell Mack and Santana Wilson. A couple of guys that redshirted last year, but CJ, you look at where they are in the 2 deep right now, both those guys making some waves this spring.
Yeah, absolutely. Wardell Mack saw sometime last year and has, kind of beefed up. He was listed at 212, Jeff. I don't know if I believe 212 for Wardell Mack, but he did look really good physically, and you need to look good physically to play that nickel spot, specifically with what we've seen from a Jahdae Barron, a Jalen Gilbo, and a Jelani McDonald in years past. To have that physicality near the line of scrimmage and as close to the line of scrimmage as they play, that's going to be key. Right now, we saw him running with the ones at that nickel spot. Of course, Jalen Gilbo's still on the team. I just omitted him here. But he has been moving outside to outside cornerback spot, and he has been getting a lot of run with the ones. Now, to fill that void, it has been Jelani, it has been Wardell Mack, and they're finding that piece of the puzzle at that spot, right? So Wardell Mack, again, what we can continue to see and hear from him in those live situations is going to be key for what he does on the field in the fall, because I think we all know Jelani McDonald, you could throw him anywhere, Jeff, and he's going to be a heck of a playmaker. Moving outside to Santana Wilson. Look, I don't want to put fear in the hearts of Texas fans here, but this is a guy that's picked up a lot of interceptions. And again, I know that you don't want to hear interceptions thrown by the quarterback. I don't know by who specifically, but Santana Wilson has been a guy that's come down with a lot. He's got his hands on a lot of footballs this spring as well. And that's what you'd hope, right? For a few years, it felt like, Jeff, that Texas cornerbacks just didn't make plays on the ball, right? Maybe they were taught to fight through hands. Maybe they were taught to just be in position, right? As Rod Baber says, just to be in form right there with the ball, with receivers. And by the time the ball comes, that they're ready to just make a play on the ball. But now you're seeing interceptions. Jahdae had 5. You saw a few others find interceptions as well. So Santana Wilson carrying on a positive trend in that secondary at the moment. He's been a bright spot so far this spring.
All right, CJ, let's move on and talk some basketball. Texas gets a couple more additions from the transfer portal. Sean Miller and his staff are working to fill out this roster for the 2025-26 season. CJ, the big one that came down over the weekend, Matas Volkatitis, the 7-foot center from FAU, over 10 points, over 5 rebounds as a freshman, the AAC Freshman of the Year. You look at this front court, CJ, and, anytime Texas has gone into the portal, it doesn't matter if it's under Chris Beard or Rodney Terry. whenever Texas is going to the portal, I feel like I always get asked, where's the size? Where's the size? Why isn't Texas recruiting size? You need a big. Well, you look at the size on this roster. You got Volkatitis. He's a 7-footer. You've got Dalen Swain, the Xavier transfer, a 6'8" forward with some length. You've got Nick Cody coming back at 6'8.5". John Clark pushing 6'9" as a freshman. We expect him to stick with Texas. Jamie Vinson, 6'10.5", 6'11". So, CJ, you look at the front line for Texas, and that's not to mention, as we sit here right now, Lucina Traore, who was a transfer from Long Beach State to Xavier, suffered an injury in the preseason, missed the entire season for Xavier, but he was basically 12 points, 10 rebounds at Long Beach State in 2023-24. If they add him, CJ, this is going to be the biggest, longest Texas team I can remember in a while. I know Shaka's teams had some good length to them and had some quality big men, but I can't remember this much front court depth just in terms of the bodies Texas has had like they're going to have on this roster potentially.
Yeah, I think a lot of Texas fans are sitting there listening to this saying about time, right? Because you had size, right? Dylan DeSue, and of course you had Shedrick on that Elite Eight team. But there wasn't necessarily rim protection. And especially when DeSue would go down, you'd sit there and say, okay, it feels like a free-for-all in the paint, and that shouldn't be the case at Texas. So with Volkatitis and his addition, at least now you got a certified 7-footer that you could stick in the middle of the paint and say, all right, no one's coming past you, right? So that's going to be something that I think Texas is very much looking forward to with Volkatitis specifically. Got to make sure that he stays out of foul trouble. He had 8 games last year with 4 fouls. He had 4 additional games where he fouled out. And again, he only averaged about 18 minutes per game. So when on the court, how do you make sure that those efficient minutes are minutes that don't get you or send, opponents to the free throw line? That's going to be key for me. But again, a guy that figured it out towards the back end of the season, final 6 games, averaged 15.5 and 7.2 rebounds. That's all conference level play from your big, right? Of course, you mentioned he was the AAC freshman of the year. Great sign there, but who else can Texas get minutes from in that spot? You mentioned a Dalen Swain. You mentioned Texas going in with John Clark and Vincent returning. It's a lot of size. 5 guys on roster that stands 6'8" or bigger. So I'll talk about you, Jeff. It's been a while since we've seen that level from a Texas team.
Yeah, and I like the way this roster is coming together. Like you said, especially if they add Lucina Traore. And again, Jerry Hamilton's been on top of this thing, and Jerry hasn't been shy about reporting. Texas leads as we sit here right now. I like adding him, CJ, because that's a proven guy that in the SEC, you need one of those guys that can just be a big physical presence down low and can just be just a force on the glass, just a top-notch rebounder. That's what Texas needs. And if they get Lucina Traore, again, from Xavier, he's in the portal. Texas leads right now, so we'll keep monitoring that, see if they add him. That would be a really big addition. So we'll keep monitoring what Sean Miller and his staff are doing in the transfer portal. CJ, quick note on Vic Schaefer and the Texas women's basketball team. Jordana Codio, she is headed to the transfer portal. Still waiting decisions from Rory Harmon as we sit here. Aaliyah Moore has the potential to come back for another year. So Vic Schaefer and that staff not going to have as much roster flexibility as Sean Miller has, obviously, but we'll be paying attention to the moves from a team that's coming off of a Final Four SEC co-champion. So, and shout out to Vic Schaefer and the Texas women's basketball team for an outstanding year. Mm-hmm. A program, CJ, on the 40 that's having an outstanding year right now is Jim Schlossnagle and that Texas baseball team. They swept Georgia over the weekend. As we sit here right now, the D1Baseball.com top 25 hasn't come out yet, but we've seen the Baseball America poll. Texas is now the number 2 team in the country. I don't think it's a big surprise to see Arkansas vault into that number 1 spot. After Texas A&M went on the road, got it together for one weekend, and took 2 of 3 from Tennessee. CJ, I didn't think we'd be sitting here after the first weekend of April saying Texas, along with Arkansas, 11-1 in SEC play, sitting tight atop the league standings, getting ready to go into this series this weekend in Lexington against Kentucky. Schloss has talked about getting to 15 wins in conference play. CJ, you're essentially 2 series away from maybe getting to that magic number of 15. I don't know where you want to start talking about baseball as we close out this show, but there's plenty we can get to. I'll just start with that Sunday game, the continued emergence of Dylan Volantis as an outstanding freshman pitcher. You can't not enough superlatives talk about Dylan Volantis, and then Rylan Galvan with the walk-off home run to finish off the sweep. Great weekend of baseball at the Dish, and man, you and I talked about it. We talked about it on Bases Loaded with Blake Monroe. This team is a lot of fun to watch, and it feels like they're just getting started.
Yeah, no, 11-1 to start conference play, Jeff. That pretty good. I don't have much else to say other than I was not expecting this early for Jim Schlossnagle. And we need to talk about Max Wiener, right? In that pitching staff. You mentioned Dylan Volantis. Of course, he's been tremendous over his last 6 outings as a freshman, but you faced a Georgia team this year. Texas faced a Georgia team this weekend who had the most explosive lineup in all of college baseball, the most home runs, the most extra base hits, second most runs scored of any team in the country. And Texas held them to 7 earned runs. That's a 2.25 ERA over those 28 innings pitched. 38 strikeouts in that 3-game sweep as well. This wasn't a pitching staff who on paper screamed strikeouts coming into the season, right? A lot of transfers, a lot of unknowns with Luke Harrison returning from injury. And yet here we are watching this team strike out as many Georgia Bulldogs as they did this weekend. Yeah, that's legit. And maybe I was waiting for that wall to hit, as you've mentioned a few times on Bases Loaded. So far, they've run through every single obstacle in their way. And you move forward in some of these series coming up thinking, how many wins can they stack in SEC play? But a heck of a start. And again, that was a tremendous series. Second top 5 series win for the Longhorns this year.
Yeah, I think they, from an offensive standpoint, they had kind of stared the devil in the face, so to speak, facing LSU earlier this year. That LSU lineup it's as talented as any lineup in the country. And I just like the fact that Max Wiener, what he's done from the mental approach with his pitchers and really getting them to buy into dominating the zone, taking it pitch by pitch. I think Luke Harrison's outing in the Saturday game really exemplified that because he wasn't at his best. We've seen better versions of Luke Harrison on the mound, but he just kept kind of grinding and fighting through it. Didn't have his best stuff, but I think Schloss said it perfectly after the game, pitched well enough to keep them in the game, to give them a chance to come back. It started with the Jaquay Stewart 2-run home run, and then they ended up winning that game in comeback fashion. But I what he's done with guys like Jared Spencer, developing that slider, Max Grubbs adding that cutter, Ruger Riojas is added to his repertoire. And against a team like Georgia, the one thing you can say about SEC teams, CJ, they hunt fastballs. If you're a fastball pitching team, they will eat you alive. Georgia's one of those lineups. They hunt fastballs. They stay on the fastball. And with as much off-speed stuff as these Texas pitchers can throw and throw it well, throw them for strikes, I think 8 of the 11 strikeouts Jared Spencer had in the Friday game, the out pitch was his slider. Grubbs using that cutter. So just really taking advantage of a team that's hunting fastballs, getting them to hack at the breaking pitches. Really, really good stuff. I can't. I know at this rate, Jim Schlossnagle is going to be the SEC Coach of the Year. I think Max Wiener should share that award just because we saw he did the last couple of years. It was rough watching this Texas pitching staff. I just felt like the message was getting mixed up. Something was lost in translation. It just wasn't clicking. But for Texas to go back this quickly under Schloss and Max Wiener, for them to be winning games with pitching, it's for Texas baseball fans, longtime Texas baseball fans, it's a welcome sight, a welcome return to that. But it's remarkable how off kilter things have been in the last few years, and then to see where it is now. It's just not to say there will be struggles because you're in the SEC, but a phenomenal job done by Max Wiener and the staff.
Yeah, and they did this without 2 of their most consistent bats, right? And you 100%. Didn't have Max Ballou, you didn't have Adrian Rodriguez, and we'll see when each gets back to the lineup. But to put up runs on Georgia and to win all 3 games in this series without 2 of your more consistent pieces right in the heart of your lineup. Talk about the depth, talk about the pitching. That's a heck of a team.
So Texas baseball gets a sweep, and also shout out to Mike White and the Texas softball team going to Columbia, Missouri, sweeping Missouri. So that's a baseball softball sweep of the Missouri Tigers.
Ranked number 1 and number 2, respectively there.
Yeah, it's good times. Whether you're at the Dish or whether you're at McCombs, good times had by all. Actually, the softball team's in action against Texas State at home on Wednesday. Baseball's got Houston Christian at home on Tuesday before they again go on the road to face Kentucky. We'll see if I don't know, maybe Schloss gets to pull the curfew card in that Sunday game and maybe extend things. But I digress. But CJ, just really, really good stuff for the spring sports right now at Texas. It's a great time to be a Longhorn fan. I say that a lot on Longhorn Weekly, but every sport, especially even Sean Miller with the basketball program, even though you've had a coaching transition, all these coaches, it's a phenomenal job done by Chris Del Conte, phenomenal culture right now at Texas in the athletic department. All of these spring sports are getting the job done.
Yeah. Again, and we go back to football, top 4, softball, baseball, 1 and 2. You look at women's basketball, top 4. There's just a lot of winning on the campus right now, and Texas fans, I'm sure, wouldn't rather have it any other way.
Hey, I'll give you the last word on this edition. A Saturday game, you were in the Yeti Yard.
Oh, yeah.
You talked about that experience on the message board at ontexasfootball.com. So I just want to give you the floor, CJ. Drew Martin, you can thank us later. Checks in the mail. CJ, you want to pump up the Yeti Yard for people that haven't experienced that out at the Dish?
No, the Yeti Yard was a blast. It's a cool atmosphere, a unique way to watch baseball, right? Normally when you're out in the outfield, you got outfield seats, you're up elevated. You get to see it from the left fielder and center fielder's perspective, which I think is really cool. Kind of help for, a baseball fiend like myself, Jeff. It puts into perspective how quickly these guys have to make reads on balls hit to them. And that's something where, as a catcher back in my day, I never really got to see it from their angle of a center fielder or left fielder. So really cool, awesome atmosphere. And again, it's BYOB. So you get to go out there, lounge in some of the Yeti chairs and have a heck of a time. Also, CDC stopped by. So you never know who you might see in the yard.
Also, it should be noted that Texas was losing when CJ went to the Yeti Yard, and that's when the comeback started. So
that's right.
I think they'll welcome you back with open arms, CJ, if you want to hang out there for another game at some point. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of Longhorn Weekly. Thank you again to Perry and Bluebird Organizing for sponsoring this edition of the show, and thank you, CJ, for your time, all the knowledge and wisdom, and some viewing tips if you're headed out to Dish for a baseball game. Stay locked into the channel. Stay locked into ontexasfootball.com. Don't forget that promo code OTFOG is still good for $49.95 for 1 year of access to ontexasfootball.com. Again, the promo code OTFOG is what you want to use to sign up at ontexasfootball.com. For CJ Vogel, I'm Jeff Howe. Thanks for watching, and until next time, hook 'em.
Welcome.